That's better, I think. Well, as long as he can hear us. We actually have a window back there so we can see. Everybody here? Yeah. Meeting is now called to order. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Mrs. Becker?
Here.
Mrs. Chu?
Here.
Dr. Cohen?
Here.
Mrs. Howard? Mrs. Lax?
Here.
Mr. Philipchak?
Present.
Mrs. Reese?
Here.
Mrs. Shaw?
Here.
Mr. Simmons?
Here, we have a quorum. Please rise to salute the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The New Jersey Open Public Meetings Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meetings of public bodies at which any business affecting their interest is discussed and acted upon. In accordance with the provisions of this Act, the East Brunswick Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, and place thereof posted at the Board of Education offices located at 760 Route 18, East Brunswick, New Jersey. Written notice was also provided to the Sentinel, the Newark Star Ledger, the Home News and Tribune, and the Municipal Clerk of East Brunswick. There's something about videotaping that's not in here, but those who speak at the board's public meeting should be aware of our videotaping rules. Good evening, everyone. Begin with the superintendent's report. Dr. Valesky.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. Good evening. Tonight, our boardroom artwork display features the best of the best. On exhibit through September is the District Honors Display. It includes 2 artworks chosen by each of the district's art teachers. The 2016 graduation ceremony was a huge success. Special thanks to Assistant Principal Matt Hannes, who is the lead administrator in the planning and implementation of graduation. Thanks also to Dr. Vanella, Assistant Principals Elizabeth Dunn and Glenn Pazinko, as well as all of the staff who participated in graduation. Congratulations to the students and staff at Hammersholt Middle School for breaking their record and raising $25,000 for the American Cancer Society at their annual Relay for Life Field Day. Department Chair Cheryl Jones and teachers Amanda Ingargiola and Diane Heilman were instrumental in facilitating this activity. Additionally, our elementary students raised approximately $3,200. With their art teachers as facilitators, students created Luminera bags that lined the track at the East Brunswick Relay for Life. Our entire educational community worked together to support the American Cancer Society. Just a reminder, on July 6th, both the Extended School Year program and the English as a Second Language program will begin. Thank you.
It's a short report, I guess, because it's summer.
It is a short report, and it is summer.
All right. May I have a motion for our Board of Education items in our F agenda? All right, let's finish F, and then we'll do go to the cause. Whoops. May I have a motion for our F items, then we'll do go to the cause.
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Shaw, second by Dr. Cohen. Is there any discussion? Will the secretary please call the roll?
Mrs. Becker?
Yes.
Mrs. Chu?
Yes.
Dr. Cohen?
Yes.
Mrs. Lax?
Yes.
Mr. Philipchak?
Yes.
Mrs. Reese?
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw?
Yes.
Mr. Simmons?
Yes, motion carries. Next is the go to the cause, where folks are invited to express themselves on school-related matters of concern. Folks are reminded to protect the privacy of all students and staff. If you have specific student and staff issues, please address them first with the appropriate administrator. Anyone who wishes to address the board. And I went and moved this go to the cause for no reason now, because we have nobody here. Okay. All right, well, seeing no one, I'll close the public portion and move to our curriculum and instruction agenda. May I have a motion for our G items?
So moved. Second.
Motion by Mrs. Becker, second by Dr. Cohen. Is there any discussion? Will the secretary please call the roll?
Mrs. Becker?
Yes.
Mrs. Chu?
Yes.
Dr. Cohen?
Yes.
Mrs. Lax?
Yes.
Mr. Philipchak?
Yes.
Mrs. Reese?
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw?
Yes.
Mr. Simmons?
Yes, motion carries. May I have a motion for our H items, facilities?
So moved.
Motion by Dr.
Second.
Cohen, second by Mrs. Shaw. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. May I have a motion for our financial services items?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Filipczak, second by Mrs. Shaw. Is there any discussion? Will the secretary please call the roll?
Mrs. Becker?
Yes.
Mrs. Chu?
Yes.
Dr. Cohen?
Yes.
Mrs. Lax?
Yes.
Mr. Philipchak?
Yes.
Mrs. Reese?
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw?
Yes.
Mr. Simmons?
Yes, motion carries. We do have an addendum to our human resources items. May I have a motion for J?
So moved.
Motion by
Second.
Mrs. Becker, second by Mrs. Shaw. Is there any discussion? Secretary, please call the roll.
Mrs. Becker?
Yes.
Mrs. Chu?
Yes.
Dr. Cohen?
Yes.
Mrs. Lax?
Yes.
Mr. Philipchak?
Yes.
Mrs. Reese?
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw?
Yes.
Mr. Simmons?
Yes, motion carries. May I have a motion for item K1, contract?
So moved.
Motion by
Second?
Mrs. Becker, second by Mrs. Shaw. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. May I have a motion for items L1 and 2, contracts?
So moved. Second?
Motion by Mrs. Becker, second by Mrs. Shaw. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. May I have a motion for our student services items M1 through 7? Thank you.
So moved.
Motion by Dr.
Second?
Cohen, second by Mrs. Becker. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Shaw?
Are these the sum total of our out-of-district placements?
Ron,
Yes.
would you mind coming up here and
They are the total of the placements at this time. The only change that we may see are students that may move into the district that the child study team would have to make a determination if they need an out-of-district placement at that point.
Okay. Do we have any idea whether or not over the last few years, the cost to the district for out-of-district placements has decreased? I mean, we talk so often about bringing more students back into district. And so although if you take a look at all these, I mean, it actually does add up to a considerable amount of money. So I'm wondering if,
Mrs. Shaw, would you like us to do an analysis, look back and see what,
yeah, I would.
how, maybe 2 years back?
May I?
Yes,
Do you have it?
I've got some data here.
Okay.
great.
So, and this is off of the three-year comparison on our budget.
That's right, okay.
So this was off of the budget for next year. So when we look at our tuition for the year that was ended last year was about $2.6 million. For the current year, which is not ended yet, the appropriations were about $2.7 million, but I know that the actual expenditures are coming in less than that. And next year, we are at 2.4 and change. So, and looking back prior to that, I know that we had some incremental decreases coming as we move forward.
Okay, I just want to, inform those who may be watching that, I believe that this board is very aware of the high cost of out-of-district placements. I don't know whether the public is aware that there are basically no financial controls on these private placements, and so that they are pretty much able to increase their costs at whim. And you can also notice, even among the different out-of-district placements, and of course, many of these schools kind of specialize in particular programs, but the cost for one program can be more than double than that for another. And also, of course, if you have the extended year program in place, or aides or nursing, that cost just goes up and up and up. But anyway, I think that, mostly we want our school community to know that we're very aware of the cost of this, but that we also believe that students that are attending out-of-district placements truly belong in them, because if we were able to provide services for them here in district, we'd be trying very hard to do that in a logical and cost-efficient way that still continues to meet their needs.
And we do it.
Yes,
We do. We do it as much as we possibly can. But Mr. Lieberman, to that point, we really can't negotiate these tuition amounts. I mean, this is...
No, we're really bound by the tuition rate that is charged. Some of the schools are part of the commission that's from Middlesex County, so we certainly go to those programs first because
Yep.
they're fiscally more responsible. For some students that we have placed in out-of-district, we've started with those programs, and if they haven't been able to meet the needs, that's when we then go to a higher priced placement too. But certainly, we're always looking at to be as efficient as possible, yet also providing a quality program for kids.
Mr. Philipsek.
Well, Ms. Lehman, I knew there was a time in the past that we did actually tour some of these facilities, and I learned a lot when I actually went
Could there be a possibility, not right away, but in the future, maybe you could set something up for one or two of the places that we could just have a little tour of it?
Absolutely.
Good, thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay, I think, do I need a roll call? No. All in favor?
Yes, you do.
I do.
actually. Yes, confirmed HIVs.
Okay, will the secretary please call the roll?
Mrs. Becker?
Yes.
Mrs. Chu?
Yes.
Dr. Cohen?
Yes.
Mrs. Lax?
Yes.
Mr. Philipchak?
Yes.
Mrs. Reese?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes.
And Mr. Simmons?
Yes, motion carries. May I have a motion for item N1, receipt of school bus evacuation drill reports?
So moved. Second.
Motion by Mrs. Becker, second by Mrs. Shaw. Is there any discussion? Secretary, I'm sorry, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Any committee or organization reports? Mr. Filipczak.
Roughly about a half hour ago, we just finished a finance meeting, and the outside auditor from Whiston Company, Mr. Gannon, came in and explained the audit procedure for timing, and he had no indication that there would be any difficulty with delivering the audit on time. It was a quick meeting, and I appreciate Dr. Cohen, Bernie, and Dr. Valesky for their participation and attendance.
Good. Excellent. I'm sorry I couldn't make that, but look forward to the same kind of audit we have every year.
Well, very lively discussions on FASB 75, 72.
We will catch up about that later. I am
I'll fill you in for
intrigued.
that later, okay? 'Cause-
Excellent.
Closed session.
Kurt was going to prepare a pamphlet on it.
I'm still smiling from that.
Well, for those of you who are having trouble falling asleep this evening, we can do that. If you'd like. Thank you for that. Any other committee organization reports? Good to the cause. Let's start with welcoming again our new student.
Thank you. Well, with the school year done and the seniors graduated, many of the students in East Brunswick are settling down into their summers. One organization in East Brunswick High School is the Bairden, and they usually work on spirit for the school. And one of their main causes is the Bairden shirts, which are provided to many of the students. So in the summer, they are starting to place in their orders. Many students are buying these shirts because this is almost a symbol of East Brunswick for our high school students. Many of the high school students have these shirts. It's kind of like a unity symbol in the high school. So these shirts will be in by August, is what I was told. Also, many of the students throughout all East Brunswick High Schools participated in the Relay for Life event. I was fortunate enough to attend. And many of my peers, many of my sister's peers, and many of the students raised thousands of dollars for the Cancer Treatment Centers of America. And this is a very enjoyable event. Thank you.
Excellent. I will say you had more to say than our superintendent did. All right.
There's your next superintendent.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Mrs. Lax.
So I know school is over, but I did attend an event since our last board meeting, so I just wanted to take a second to say thank you to Kathy Chappelle and Lori Dennenberg, who did a beautiful job with some of our special needs students at the elementary level. It was an art and music festival, and they invited me, and I attended. And for the rest of you, next year, mark your calendar at the end of the year. It was absolutely beautiful. These children were so happy. They made sure to pass the microphone throughout so that every parent got to hear their child's voice. They had students coming up to the microphone to sing, to speak, to talk about artwork. And, you know, we always talk about all the different accolades. We give a lot of awards here, and I know I've been to a few of the honors students' musical achievements and art achievements, but this was just something. You know, I never want to forget that there is that segment of the population and how impressive they are and how beautiful it was. So to Mrs. Chappelle and Mrs. Dennenberg, you know, I thank you for having me there, you know, and sharing your children. It was beautiful.
All right. Any other good of the cause? Okay, well, we do have a need for closed session. So may I have a motion for closed session for the reasons in the agenda, specifically HIB case number HS1516.045, and the employee numbers that are listed in your agenda, along with IT reorganization. Motion by Mrs. Becker, second by Mrs. Shaw. Is there any discussion? I'll remind folks that we may reconvene into public session where action might be taken. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Good night.